So today we're going to take a look at a real blueprint for survival. This is a national plan from an island nation that's right on the front lines of climate change. And it's designed not just to, endure what's coming, but to actually build a thriving future. Let's dive in. When you boil this entire policy down, it really comes down to this one huge question. When the very land underneath your feet is at risk, how do you possibly plan for tomorrow, let alone the next 50 or 100 years? It's a challenge that just demands a totally new way of thinking. The first and most obvious problem is the relentless rise of the sea. And this isn't some far-off prediction for these nations, it's what they live with every single day. We're talking about saltwater creeping into homes, corroding essential infrastructure, and even poisoning the fresh water they need to drink. And what makes that even tougher is the simple fact of limited space. I mean, on an island, where can you go? There's often nowhere to retreat to. Every single square meter is incredibly precious, which means every decision about what to build and where you build it, it carries enormous weight. So you take those rising seas, you combine it with no space to escape, and what you get is a genuine existential threat. This isn't just about a hit to the economy. It's about the very real possibility of losing a nation's culture, its sovereignty, its actual place on the map. Okay, so in response to that massive threat, this policy was created. Think of it as a comprehensive national blueprint. It's meant to guide every single decision about how land is used, how it's developed, and even how new land is created. Right, here's the official language, but it's about so much more than just, say, building bigger seawalls. The policy creates a unified national framework that's all about resilience, safety, and sustainability. And that word unified is really the key here. It's meant to be the end of just scattered, one-off projects. The whole thing is built on 5 big ideas. First, create a safe national structure. Second, smartly separate different kinds of activities. Third, use nature itself as a defense. Fourth, get a handle on creating new land. And finally, and this is so important, make sure the rules are actually enforced. Now, before you can plan a single island, you have to plan the entire nation. So the very first step in this policy is to organize all the islands into this logical hierarchy. It's all about making sure that services and safety are spread out in a way that actually makes sense. And here's what that structure looks like. You've got your primary hubs. These are the big ones, the national core, with major ports and hospitals. They also act as designated safe islands. Then you have secondary hubs that serve each atoll with things like schools and emergency shelters. And finally, you've got the local islands where most people live, all linked together. It creates a resilient network, not just a bunch of isolated, vulnerable spots. So that's the big picture. But how does this all translate down to a single community? Well, let's take a little tour of what a smart island would actually look like under this blueprint, and we'll go zone by zone. First up on our tour is the administrative heart of the island. The government zone puts all the key services, offices, courts, emergency response, all in one place. And its location is totally strategic. It's central, easy to get to, and crucially, it's positioned safely away from industrial areas, but still close to the commercial hub. Okay, next up is where people actually live, the residential zone. Here, the number one priority is safety. You'll notice it's designed to be in the middle ring of the island. That means it's physically shielded from the sea by coastal buffers and separated from any industry by green belts. The whole focus is on walkable communities and building up, not sprawling out. Now for the island's economic engine, the commercial zone. And this isn't just a random mishmash of shops. It's planned out as a central activity spine that's designed to be vibrant, pedestrian-friendly, and perfectly plugged into transport hubs, linking everything and everyone together. So, what about industry? How do you handle that safely? Well, the plan restricts it all to a specific controlled access zone. And check out its placement. On the leeward side of the island, that's the side sheltered from the wind, far away from homes and separated by those green buffer zones. It's all about minimizing risk for residents. All right, our tour ends with the island's natural infrastructure. The green and blue-green zone isn't just about having pretty parks. No way. This is a fundamental line of defense. It uses things like mangroves and natural vegetation as a buffer against the sea, all while cooling the island and protecting its precious groundwater. It's working double duty. Of course, sometimes there just isn't enough land. And that brings us to a really sensitive topic, reclamation, literally creating new land from the sea.
The policy treats this not as a free-for-all, but as a carefully controlled process that should only be a last resort. So before anyone can even think about reclaiming land, they have to pass this four-step test. First, avoidance. Can you meet the need by building up instead of out? If not, minimization. Can you shrink the footprint? Then optimization. Is this the absolute best spot to cause the least harm? And finally, offsetting. Can you somehow make up for the damage you're going to cause? It just forces a complete reevaluation of the whole idea.
And wow, the difference is just stark. Look at this. On the left, you've got the old way, unplanned, super risky, and terrible for the environment. But on the right, you have the policy-guided approach. It's based on science, it's planned to create high-elevation safe islands, and it's designed to be as responsible as humanly possible. But, a plan this ambitious isn't worth much if it just sits on a shelf collecting dust. So the final piece of this whole puzzle is governance. Who actually has the power to enforce these rules and make sure this vision for the future becomes reality? The policy sets up three guardians of the plan. At the very top, you have a powerful national authority that signs off on every major decision. Then in the middle, there's an integrated permitting system to make sure every project gets a really tough review. And on the ground, local councils are empowered to manage and monitor their own islands. And this is absolutely crucial. The plan knows it can't be static. The climate is changing fast, so the policy itself has to be a living document. It has a mandatory 5-year review cycle built right in, which ensures it's always using the latest climate science and technology. It can adapt. So at the end of the day, we're left with this thought. The blueprint is thorough, it's ambitious, and it's based on solid science. But a plan is only ever as strong as the will to actually build it. So is this framework the key to securing a nation's future against the rising tide? Well, only time will tell.